coming relative to the economy, and especially anything dollar-based. Now, there are arguments out there that, oh, well, the dollar can't crash because of X, Y, or Z. And all of the reasons that they're stating, that people are stating that the dollar can't crash or dissolve or disappear, are not not factual relative to what's happened in the past. Just because the dollar is held as a global reserve currency doesn't mean it can't be unheld as global reserve, and we see that that's occurring now. Mm-hmm. And just because 64% of the nominal or notational wealth of the planet is held in dollars doesn't mean that it will continue to be so, and it also doesn't mean that those people wouldn't be wiped out if the global reserve dollar goes away. So there's certain trends in place that we're seeing show up relative to that immediacy data that indicate that what shows up between 16th and 22nd of August will have a higher degree of visibility. It'll be relative to economics. Whatever it will be discussing will have already occurred and probably has already occurred. We're just going to find out about it in this week of 16th to 22nd, and then that'll set the trend line for us through to November or so.
So are you able to put what is going to happen into any kind of categories, like the bankruptcy of the Federal Reserve, or Russia attacking us, or the pandemic wiping us all out?
Well, that's okay. Now, those are all separate issues. The issue on the August 16th to the 22nd relates to economic.
Okay.
And so it's actually relating to the derivatives. Now, we're in a funny situation here in the United States. The federal deficit, we're rapidly approaching a period of time, if things don't radically change, when 100% of everything that the federal government can generate in terms of money will be required to cover the interest on money already previously borrowed. So we're about to hit the point where if the federal government was a regular guy working as a machinist or something, 100% of their salary would have to go to cover their debt, just the interest on the debt, and that's paying back no principal. This situation came about because of the Act of Slavery of 1913, in which the Federal Reserve was created. Now, technically, the Federal Reserve is broke. It is bankrupt. It does not have any assets. It has pieces of paper that say it owns other pieces of paper and nominally what is on those pieces of paper, but basically it owns nothing because of the way in which it's structured, and it's all a giant confidence scheme. So we do have data indicating that as of this October, and especially from the end of October through November of next year, 2010, that the Federal Reserve comes to the point where their dominating language goes to the idea that they're irrelevant to our lives. They no longer matter. Whether they exist or not is immaterial. So the decisions that will be made by the Fed, say after July of this coming year, July of 2010, won't matter to anybody. It'll just be a bunch of people out there playing with themselves in total isolation because they won't have any real effective power anymore due to the events that will occur between now and then. Again, that sort of makes sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not seeing that the Fed's going to go disappear as of August of this year, but the derivative crisis that's already in the way, already occurring, that will become visible between the 16th and the 22nd, and likely more closer to the 22nd, is actually setting the stage for the next phase. Now, if you're in a standard economic model paradigm like the Keynesian kind of economics, then you would be looking at our current period of time as a potential W-shaped, quote, recovery or flow pattern into recovery. And if you were looking at that period of stuff from that particular viewpoint, they would see us sitting right at the apex of the middle of the W and about to go down the next leg, knowing, theoretically, and from their viewpoint, that when we hit the bottom of that next leg, that would be it, and then we'd be into recovery mode, and this would be able to be plotted out. And thus they would say, oh, okay, maybe the second half of this year is going to be ugly because we're going to go into this next down leg, but then from that point on, happy days are here again, prosperity's just around the corner, blah, blah, blah. But what they're missing is a whole lot of other impacts that basically make their model an incomplete and inaccurate representation of what's going on in the global markets. Now, our data suggests that things like that hyperinflation is coming, that this hyperinflation is going to affect things all the way at market levels, all the way up to the market structures themselves. That is in the sense that if we get hyperinflation and it goes to the point where it's even remotely like Weimar or Zimbabwe, then the markets are moot. There's no point to even dealing with them because you'd go on in the morning and assets would depreciate more in a single day than they had run up in the previous year, or vice versa. The level of volatility would be reflected not by the actual, quote, value of the paper asset, but rather by the notational value on it relative to your currency. So if you get up in the morning and 2 Canadian dollars were equal to 1 Canadian dollar, but by the time dinner rolls around, you get 6 Americans for your Canadians, and thus for 2 Canadians you get 12 American dollars, well, then stocks are cheap for you, and you may go on in and play around with them because it's relatively meaningless. And we're rapidly approaching that period of time. In our data, it really kind of kicks off around the 25th of October. And then amongst all of that, we have this other stuff of the release of the swine flu into the wild, so to speak, and dealing with the components of the flu itself, as well as the nut jobs out there producing harmful substances on the theory that they can make money getting you to accept them. So it's going to be a rather strange fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so in October we've got economic woes, but we've also got the swine flu, we've got the vaccinations, and we've got this alien wars. Alien wars?
Yeah, that essentially begins this October with, we've been talking about alien wars for a number of years in our data. We'll pick it up on the other side. Yeah.
I know, everybody needs to go out and get a stiff drink. I think right back. We're talking to Cliff High from Half Past Human, and we'll take it up right there with alien wars starting in October. You're listening to Radio RMN on the Micro Effect. Welcome back. This is Radio RMN. My name is Raylan Allen, and I'm talking with Cliff High from Half Past Human. And we left you with the ominous feeling that the aliens are going to attack in October.
Well, it's not quite that way.
It's not that.
No, it's not that. Our language begins with archetypes and then gradually drills down to detail. And so around 2004, we had this new cluster of language that developed in our model space that we collected off into this entity. And it's been forecasting this juxtaposition of 2 large data sets. And so each data set, one data set was headed by aliens or extraterrestrials, and the other data set was by war. And so we merged those into a single descriptor called alien wars. Now that is forecasting language, that is to say the appearance of language in our future that relates to those 2 concepts in this larger set. And beyond that, it's a guess at this stage. The further out we see something, that is to say, we begin seeing this 2003, 2004, and yet it seems to have an extremely long-range impact and won't start showing up until 2009. And so around 2004, we started forecasting for about the summer of 2009 that we were going to get into the beginning of the language for alien wars, which was going to peak in 2011. Now, the way our stuff works, we don't really get a description of what's going on. We get a vague sort of a description of what the language will be like that will be used after that, whatever it is, happens. And so, in this case, we'd said that the first part of that language would show up this year in this temporal marker chain of events, and indeed it has. Now, the language is showing up in a funny way. It's not, or a curious way. It's not showing up in the sense of, Martian space aliens attack Cincinnati or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. But instead, we're actually seeing in the mainstream press the juxtaposition of language relating to war and to the interplanetary coming from NASA, in the sense that the mainstream press use language like NASA to bomb another planet, in this case, the moon. NASA to, launch a rocket projectile weapon against the moon, and so on. And so we saw the beginning of the alien wars language in this curious fashion coming out from the language around NASA.